This is the first episode. This is episode 1, and basically just going to be an introduction to the podcast and to the very, very, very basics of moonshine. This is Still in the Clear, the podcast that distills the art and science of home distilling into easy-to-follow, audible nuggets for the beginning moonshiner. I'm your host, Cyrus, and I'm just a guy that lives in the woods and likes to make shine. So let's get into it. Before we get started today, I want to remind you about The Mash. The Mash is our free bi-weekly newsletter that's delivered straight to your inbox. Each issue is packed with all kinds of useful moonshine stuff. You don't want to miss it. So go sign up at stillintheclear.com/newsletter. I'll put a link in the show notes. Just click on that link. It'll take you right to the page where you sign up. Just leave your name and your email. That's all you got to do, and that automatically signs you up. So, now, first, I'm Cyrus. As I said before, I've been making shine for lots of years. You can't call me an expert because there's a lot of stuff about moonshining I don't know. But I'm going to share everything I do know, and I'm going to do interviews with others who know more than me, and we can just learn all this together. I can learn new things, you can learn new things, and we can take this journey together and get better at making moonshine. The podcast itself is going to focus on getting more people into the hobby of home distilling. We're going to start with basics and move through all the aspects of home distilling that we can discover. We're going to talk about the process, the science, the equipment, the supplies, and of course the final product. I'm going to be doing bonus episodes where I interview veteran moonshiners, talk to them about their processes for their distillation, maybe even get some recipes from these folks if they want to share them. Most people will share at least some of their recipes. And I'm going to interview newcomers to the hobby too, because I think that will be really useful to talk to somebody who's fresh and just getting in it, and they can still talk about these kinds of lessons that we learn in the beginning. And, I should have done this, I should have done that, or this was a waste of time, or I shouldn't have listened to this person, I should have listened to this person, or whatever it ends up being. We can learn a lot from the people who are just now getting into the hobby also. So I'm going to talk to some of those folks too. I'm also going to be doing some product reviews for various pieces of equipment and supplies, ingredients, those kinds of things. And a lot of this happens within our group, Moonshine for Beginners on MeWe, which I mentioned before. I'll mention it again. You got to join us on that group. It's a lot of fun. But a lot of, we're always talking back and forth about this thing that we're using or that thing. And so that's good. But what I would like to do is get into some kind of like deep dive interviews and really talk about the ins and outs of different equipment and supplies and ingredients. I think that would be helpful. So that's really what I've got in mind for this podcast. I'm excited to do it. I hope you guys are excited about it also. It'd be really helpful too. If you know anybody that might be into moonshining or home distilling, share this podcast with them. The more people we can reach, the better. Now let's kind of get into some things. What is moonshine, first of all? People seem to be a little bit confused sometimes about what moonshine actually is. They think it's a particular type of whiskey a lot of times, and that's not correct. Here's the definition of moonshine. It is illicitly distilled or smuggled liquor. And so why would liquor be illicitly distilled? One, it might be just straight out prohibited, like in prohibitions in America. It's not the case anymore, obviously, but now it means you didn't go through the proper channels and pay Uncle Sam his cut to be able to do it. And so it's illicit. So why would you smuggle liquor? Well, for the same reason. It's illicit. Uncle Sam didn't get his cut, so now you got to sneak around him. So that's all moonshine is. It can be any kind of spirit, any kind of alcohol. It can be whiskey, it can be rum, it can be brandy, it can be vodka, it can be corn liquor. It doesn't matter. The only thing that really makes moonshine moonshine is that Uncle Sam didn't get his cut. And what's kind of funny to me is that you can buy moonshine in a liquor store, which doesn't make sense to me because, it's legal moonshine, but moonshine is illegal liquor. So it's an oxymoron, it's like right up there with an efficient bureaucracy or government assistance. You know what I mean? Like words that don't belong together put together. So legal moonshine is one of those words. Objective politics. There's another one. Anyway, I don't need to get off on tangents. So let's kind of get into how alcohol is made. In the simplest terms, yeast eats sugar and releases alcohol and carbon dioxide. And that's how it's made. It's that simple. Now, there are all kinds of variables that will affect to what degree this happens, how well it happens, how efficient is the process, what your yield will be. There's a lot of variables that go into that. But just to keep things simple for the beginner, that's all it is. And you have some basic steps that are pretty simple also. You have to have sugar and yeast in a suitable environment, which is water mixture within a favorable temperature range. And that mixture will begin to ferment, which is the process of yeast converting the sugar into alcohol and carbon dioxide. Once the fermentation process is complete, you separate out the alcohol from the mixture through distillation. And that is turning the alcohol into steam and then recondensing it from steam back into liquid. So that's it. It's really simple. You got 2 ingredients plus water, sugar and yeast, and that's all it takes. You get the environment right, and you can make alcohol. At this point, I'm going to introduce a reoccurring segment that we're going to have that I'm going to call Shiner Speak. And maybe I'll put some music to this or do some kind of little intro for the segment, I don't know what I'll do with that. We'll see. But this is where I'm going to take some moonshine terms that you may or may not have heard before, and I'm going to define what they mean. And so it's pretty common in these circles that we mix up the words. We mix up the words and the definitions because, quite honestly, this is kind of a homegrown hobby. And so a lot of it all is word of mouth, and things get mixed up and confused. And I'm sure I get things mixed up and confused where I've learned something one way and that's not really the right way, but that's how I learned it. And, everybody does that. And it's pretty prevalent in home distillation, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with it. But so I'm going to attempt to help with the jargon. And you know what? Sometimes I might even get it wrong. And so if I do, anyone out there who knows I've got it wrong, you just need to let me know. Send me an email, which, that'd be awesome. And by the way, the email address that you can reach me at and send me an email for whatever you want is cyrus@stillintheclear.com. Okay, so this week's Shiner Speak is going to be, what is the difference between mash and wash? So here it is. Wash is a liquid. It doesn't have any grains or fruit or anything in it. The mash is the liquid that still has all your ingredients in it. So you're mashing it, and then you separate out all the ingredients so that you just have the liquid. Now you've got wash. It goes from mash to wash. And those terms are used interchangeably a lot by a lot of people, and there's no problem with that. I do it sometimes. So that's just the definition. Okay, so now let's talk about the sugar mash. Why is it so popular? Well, it's popular because, well, I think mainly it's popular because it's easy. It is the simplest way to make alcohol. Mix some sugar and some water, add some yeast, and wait. That's it. So that's the main reason. And because of that, it's the best starting place for the beginner. So that makes it the next reason why it's popular. If you're just starting out, you need to start with a sugar wash or a sugar mash, either one. And it's inexpensive. So when you start getting into some complex recipes, it gets pricey, and it can get pricey pretty fast. But the sugar mash, the sugar wash, it's easy and cheap, and that's why it's really popular. You know, there's also some kind of moonshine mythology floating around that the sugar mashes that contain corn products, like cracked corn, cornmeal, or cornflake, that those are the original, authentic moonshine recipes. And this isn't true. But that's kind of what people think. And I think I know why that is the case. First of all, people made moonshine from whatever they had around. They made it from what was readily available to them. Now, it's true, corn has been readily available to most people for a long time. But I think where this mythology comes from, really, is me and a buddy of mine who owns and operates a local brewery supply, were talking the other day, and he was telling me about how during the Depression, people could get feed corn, sugar, and yeast from the government, or the government subsidized them or gave it. I'm not sure. You could either get it for free or it was subsidized heavily, so it was really cheap. And, you know, those are the only three ingredients you need, really. You don't even need the corn, just the sugar and the yeast. But adding the corn really changes the flavor. It sweetens it up. And so that became a staple moonshine recipe during the Depression. But that's not by definition an authentic moonshine recipe, because there's no such thing as an authentic moonshine recipe, because people used just whatever they had. But I think that's where that mythology comes from, because it was the corn mash recipe was so prevalent during the Depression that I think that's where that mythology comes from. Anyway, that's just kind of little interesting tidbit. Next week, we're going to get into the equipment. We're going to start talking about what you need to get started in home distillation, so don't miss that. That's going to be interesting, and we'll be able to get started. Well, that wraps up this week's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Share this episode with people you think might enjoy it. That would be much appreciated. It'll sure help our show grow. And don't forget, doing is improving. Have a good one. Talk to y'all next week.